Hello, welcome to episode 46 of the TELEMEDIA podcast. And it's a special episode because I'm joined by my very special guest, Julia Dimambro from Seriously Fresh Media, top cat at the top content company.
Hello.
Hi, Jules. Thanks for joining us. Lovely to see you. Um, we're going to talk about content today because that's one of the one of your specialist subjects, one of your many specialist subjects. There was a report out last week that some of you may have seen in the latest Telemedia newsletter that came out last week from Data AI about how globally more people are using mobile for longer amounts of time, spending more money in it. Mobile advertising as a result actually is growing phenomenally, but revenue from sort of other mobile services is particularly surging. It's all up by about 10% year on year. One of the interesting standouts in this report, which is massive and covers absolutely everything in the mobile industry, is that sort of Gen Zers particularly are consuming more mobile streamed video content. They're also making a lot of their own sort of UGC, but the standout for me was this streaming video content that's still massively popular. And now most people think about streaming, they think about Netflix, which is huge, and Prime and Hulu and all those sorts of people. But there's an opportunity for much smaller sort of niche stuff, isn't there, Jules?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, sort of in preparation for like sort of having this chat with you about content, sort of one of the things I did was sort of have a look in terms of what other people are saying are the content trends for 2024. Because obviously, Seriously Fresh tends to have a very specific view, which is based around our clients. What do our clients need? What are they asking for? And that gives us a general sense of sort of where the trends are in telemedia, because the majority of our clients will tend to be sort of in the DCB area, the telemedia area, rather than these sort of big platforms. So it was very interesting to have a look actually in terms of specifically for streaming video, where generally our brain tends to go to your sort of Primes and your Hulus and your Netflixes and all of that. How much there was for me, how many sort of categories or trends that were actually overlapping very much with sort of what we have spoken about in the past with VAS. Obviously some new stuff as well. Obviously sort of AI is a big area that sort of everybody, not only is interested in, but I think really needs to kind of get some knowledge around. But yes, sort of, it surprised me that sort of looking at trends in streaming video, how sort of they were still talking about how short form content is still a major trend for 2024, how educational and how-to videos are still a major trend for 2024. And I think it's interesting what you're saying in that the generation that we are, where we grew up with longer form content, that's kind of like, right, I'm going to sit down and chill out. I want to watch something where I can sort of put it on and leave it running and sort of throw myself into that for the next hour and a half or whatever. But obviously where our kids and sort of getting on to grandkids are from another generation, and the whole way that they have grown up is about with where the value is, or as us as a product, our value is our attention span, how much actually they gear much more towards the sort of short form content. And actually I had my niece here the last week, and I was going right, Saturday afternoon, we'd had a bit of a session on the Friday night, feeling a bit delicate on the Saturday, I just settle down on the sofa, put a nice movie on, right?
Mm.
Which would be I don't know, for you and me, I think nice movie. She was kind of I absolutely hate watching movies, I can't watch
No,
anything like
really?
that. No. So that was sort of oh my God, is it? I mean, obviously, I can't say that's anecdotal. Is that her, or is that actually a trend that's happening? But I found that quite interesting. And if you think about it, the way that they've grown up, they've been very much sort of
Yeah.
programmed into very short, that kind of instant gratification, that quick, this one is an interesting move to the next one. They're not really missing out on anything if they sort of stop it after
Yeah.
30
No,
seconds,
quite.
1 minute, 10 minutes.
Mm.
So I'm wondering if where we're talking streaming platforms and we're getting trends that are short form videos are, going to be a massive thing still in 2024. Are we actually looking at the generational differences there, where they tend to be sitting alongside each other? And we've kind of they always say we're immigrants because we kind of immigrated to technology where it's evolved so dramatically in the last sort of 30 years. Whereas obviously, our kids are natives where they literally had technology there from the day that they were born. And is that kind of what we're seeing, where we're sort of seeing kind of contradictory almost trends in terms of short form's really cool, but long form's really doing really well as well. So I'm wondering about that kind of thing. And then I think for the educational and how to and stuff like that, which again tends to be sort of more short form, but I find even myself, like the big value for me in YouTube and places like that is actually the sort of like what I learn from it. So I'll get into a certain topic for a couple of years, sort of like, you remember when I was sort of into nutrition, there was very little that I couldn't find, both as short form or long form, depending on how I was working my day, whether I was sort of in the car on the way to somewhere, whether I was cooking something or whatever. And I could choose between sort of like these big, long, kind of video explanations and presentations, or I could also go to the short form. The other interesting thing in terms of like when you look at podcasts, which are now, a lot of podcasts are now being done with video, we've gone like everything was sort of like shorter attention span. And now this is a sort of new content product that's coming out, very much long form. So, I think it's kind of, we're in that transitional kind of phase
I
where
think
two
so.
generations are amalgamating on into technology.
Well, I think so. I think it's really interesting because my teenage children, they aren't averse to watching movies and box sets and all that. And often, a rainy Sunday afternoon, we will plonk ourselves in front of the TV to watch a movie, and they love it. What I notice is that they also are watching on their phones, TikTok and Snapchat and all the short form stuff. So I think in a way you're right. There's a generational
The
thing.
attention deficit.
Us older people, though, I'm finding it as well that increasingly I'm kind of more watching sort of YouTube shorts than anything else. And if I'm trying to find out how to do something, I try and find a short on it, not a 15-minute sort of lengthy video. So I think even our generation is changing. But what I think is interesting, I don't know whether you agree, is that what we're actually seeing is that there's a place for long form and medium form and short form. It's much more of a sort of mixture, and I think it's sort of trying to work out what at any given point anyone wants to watch. That's the sort of tricky thing, isn't it? So any business that's trying to sort of drive traffic to content, it's got to have a bit of everything. Do you think that's true?
I think that's absolutely true. I think there's some good points in there. So, like, sort of one of the things that we find ourselves having, we're having a lot of meetings, sort of at TeleMedia, as an example, with marketeers, where previously they sort of done the competition side things, the prize draws and all of that, collect all the traffic and the data for that, and then obviously, sell that to their clients. And sort of one of the things we started talking about to them is how actually, if you're creating something that's very around a particular theme, so that can be, I think, ideally, in that case, short form would work much better. But where you're creating, say, I don't know, something around cooking, for example, and you are then collecting the traffic based on that, it gives you a much more sort of tailored data set that you can then sort of sell to people who are specifically looking to set up a cooking service or a cooking channel or whatever. So I think in terms of sort of the sort of the different durations of video, I think a lot of that sort of lends itself, like you say, to kind of, what is the objective first for the person who's providing the service? Because, for example, for service providers, if you are creating sort of more sort of short form niche content, stuff that's easily browsable, let's say, you're going to be looking for content that's going to be sort of compelling to that particular audience. Whereas if you're going for long form, then I tend to find we never get requests, for example, for like long form. They want to create a fitness website or something, or fitness portal or something like that, or app or whatever. They're not normally looking for long form content, they're looking for short form. So maybe that difference between long form and short form is also slightly relevant to the kind of topic when you move outside of things like how to and educational and stuff that is generally you would find on sort of TikTok or YouTube. So, for example, if we get people looking for longer content, it does tend to be more sort of documentary, movies, that kind of stuff, or series, as opposed to we want like long form content to create like a cooking channel. It tends to be more short form. And I think that you're very right in that it lends to how these behavioral patterns have changed in both our generation and their generation for that type of content. Like you say, like, I want as much information as possible in the shortest amount of time that I've got available.
So how does the service provider say sort of decide what kind of mix of long and short form content it needs to have? Is that a how long is a piece of string question, or is there a sort of method to it?
I think so. Well, I think when you're looking at if you're looking down the DCB route, then it's going to be based on services that they already have. So when somebody wants to launch a new service, obviously they want something that they haven't already got 10 others of that kind of conflicts to that. But again, what we're finding in terms of the short form and the long form tends to be more about whether it is, sort of that more sort of documentary movie style, feature length style of content, or when it's something that tends to be general interest, which, sort of I believe very much in terms of the benefits to a service provider to be able to launch a service around a specific genre, whether that be knowledge, training, how to, or whatever, or whether it just be sort of general interest about, I don't know, sewing or nutrition or whatever. How you're portraying that within the environment. I've kind of lost my trail of thought there a little bit. But yeah, so the long form versus the short form. Because the other thing that we're also seeing is that apparently one of the big trends for this year is vertical videos.
Oh,
So
okay.
now where people are actually producing videos to fill the whole screen, whether it's sort of short form or long form. And it's actually something we've noticed, sort of we offer that news service where it's all around sort of, celebrity showbiz, music, movies and all of that. They've actually come back to me and said, definitely push the vertical videos, because we're actually seeing we're getting a lot more traction on that. So again, I think that goes to your point about how viewers, both young and old, are sort of viewing a lot more content via their mobile, and that's why that format is seeing such an uptake.
That's interesting, actually, because I was sort of thinking like the next thing I was going to ask you was sort of what, you mentioned things like cooking and sewing and general interest. I was going to ask you, and I still will, what some of the kind of interesting topic areas are. But I hadn't thought of it in terms of, yes, they want all these things now in vertical format, because again, I'd watch YouTube shorts, whether it's on my phone or my computer. I don't really notice, but yes, it's all vertical. So that's quite a big change, isn't it? You're now having to source content that fits into that dimension, not that dimension, which is a bit
Yes, but I think and it must be enough of a demand for that for people,
yeah,
because obviously the added cost to be able to produce
yeah,
that particular format. Because with the news feeds, for example, they're still producing the old
yeah.
one because they work with sort of big websites, all these kind of women's magazines online and things like that. So they're still producing those, but they're saying actually in terms of growth and engagement from the users, it's actually the vertical videos that seem to be gaining the most traction. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Interesting. So what are some of the sort of hot subject topics, long and short form, and is there a difference between which ones do long, which ones do short? You like I say, you've mentioned cooking. We've done some, you've touched on general interest. I mean, what's some of the sort of hot areas sort of now and are likely to be in 2024, do you think?
I think anything that's kind of educational. So if you're kind of picking a topic and like anything from kind of selling, gardening, DIY, fixing your house up, all of this kind of stuff. I mean, you even see like those sort of like those hack videos, and if you like all these like sort of little tricks that you've never
Yeah,
realized that you
yeah.
should be doing with your cling film and stuff like that.
Absolutely,
So all
totally
of that.
addicted to those. It's the top tips that I watch and then never put into practice. But yes, yeah,
Yeah,
that's very
I definitely will. And then the video finishes, and then you can't remember what they all are. But I mean, I've tended to find all of those kind of things where it's almost, and I like the idea of it, it's sort of knowledge sharing. So someone has realized that actually, if you like get all your garlic cloves and put them in a jar and shake them around, the peel comes off. And that might be helpful to other people. And I kind of quite like that whole concept. But even, like you're saying, I got very much into like nutrition. I got very much into when blockchain first came out, and sort of, I remember even sort of someone coming to me and going like NFTs, and I'm going, what the hell are those? I need to know about them and all of that. And I swear to God, I was like I hate ironing, and I was doing ironing one morning. I think I do it about twice a year. I hate it that much. And I thought, right, I am going to learn about NFTs by the time I finish the ironing. And so I literally made up this playlist of all these videos I thought might be interesting because you could obviously forward them. But like you say, they were all kind of short form because it was sort of different perspectives on the point that I wanted to learn. So I think that stuff, whether you're our generation or whether you're our kids' generation, is incredibly compelling still because, you know, with that much noise in the marketplace generally, sort of around content and sort of, you know, you portraying your personality and who you are in whatever way you do that, it's kind of like, how do you stand out? And I think the more that you know about a selection of subjects rather than sort of specializing in one is kind of where sort of, you know, wisdom and tolerance and acceptance and all of those kind of good personality traits come from.
Excellent, an excellent point.
It's
It's interesting because some time ago I pointed out to the powers that be at Telemedia Towers, Jarvis Todd, if you're watching, that education was going to be a big topic, and he laughed at me. Oh, these people aren't going to sell educational content, and it turned out that actually, yes, it was. But what's actually happened is that everything has become educational. Like you say, people want to learn about how to do selling, how to do DCB, how to do premium rate services, how to use cling film more effectively. It's really interesting that all of it has become educational, which, like you say, it can only make the world a better place, hopefully, because it brings tolerance and understanding.
Yes, exactly. And even if you think about that, like when we were, I don't know, when we were in our early 20s, for example, you wanted to learn something, you would have to look up a course or something like that. And that would be kind of what they were selling online back then. I honestly believe, and I've even kind of done sort of courses for like, you know, sort of business ownership and things like that. And they'll say like, anything you want to learn, go online and you'll be able to learn it.
Yeah, but just do. I mean, I've moved house recently, so there's a lot of things I'm trying to sort of like build, fix, and all the rest of it. And I just
feel that pain.
Oh, I spend most of my time on YouTube trying to find like someone who's done it because the instructions don't make any sense. But actually, it is all there, and it's often a lot better. It is interesting that it's all become totally educational. But how do you monetize that? What's the sort of key way to monetize that education? Because obviously I don't want to pay, I want to just learn. So what's the sort of monetization sort of path for this?
Well, then isn't that where the sort of like your fast and your AVODs and all of that come in that, you know, so you're offering that, but you're monetizing on the data and the traffic. And again, you know, what we're talking about is when you, instead of kind of being like a Netflix where you offer one model for all and you're actually drilling down and you're going, okay, you have different verticals. So I've got a vertical here for home decoration. I've got a vertical here for gardening or whatever. When those verticals are separated and you're capturing the data, even if that service is free, you're collecting data that is then very targeted and has an additional value on it. Also, when you're selling those kind of services, you can buy obviously the traffic and the marketing space and all of that at a much better rate because you're targeting a much smaller, more targeted audience. So it has benefits for both the person who is running the service plus the you know, the marketeers who then want to sort of leverage and sell that data.
Interesting. Yes, interesting idea. One of the things I've been trying to learn about, funnily enough, watching podcasts mainly, is about AI, which I don't know. It's one of those curious subjects because now every AI is in and behind everything. So it's not really sort of a thing, but I feel I want to understand it more. What sort of role do you think AI plays in I guess the content creation and the service creation and understanding the data? What sort of where does AI fit into this, do you think?
I am incredibly humble about this in that sort of we've been, you know, looking at AI and even sort of doing work with a certain amount of AI for probably about sort of 2 years now. And I think anyone who sits here in February 2024 and go, and I would sit here and go, right, I think what's going to happen with AI is this will naturally be a liar, for want of a better word. It's like how can you know? It's just because the growth or its self-learning is exponential. I think it's impossible to say. All I'm feeling very much this year is that the shift will be so profound. So I've been thinking, like, you know, sort of in the lead up to this podcast, because I think it's one of the most interesting subjects that will happen to content. Everything from sort of like influencer content, you know, your own kind of content creation, anything that happens on social, all of that. When you look what's going to be happening with the presidential election in the US of 2024, all of this, the impact will be so profound. And I think in some ways, absolutely amazingly so, because I think content creation in itself, whether you're somebody like Seriously Fresh, whether you're somebody kind of running services and you want to create a portal around a particular subject, whether you're an influencer and you're like generating content from that, you know, that the influencer might not even have to be in front of the screen. It will all be done through you know, you know, deep fake or whatever, you know, so you can just plaster their face onto things and generate content from that. And I think it's more about like where this goes. I think the ride is just going to be so profound now and kind of so fast. I'd be very humbled by the fact of somebody who can like they're preempting like
Oh,
in
sure.
1 year's time what we should be doing. I feel all of us at this stage are going on a little bit along for the ride, so to speak. But one thing I think is that, and I always see this as sort of the window between the two worlds in terms of before AI and after AI, is that in this particular stage that we're in, the AI isn't capable of doing it on its own. So when we were creating series last year and we kind of wanted to test out using AI like voiceovers, using AI video, all of this kind of thing, and everything that we've looked at, you actually need for it not to just look like an AI created it. You definitely need a substantial amount of human intervention still. So
Yeah.
even like when we did like the blockchain series last year, we would write the script, we would throw that script into AI, and what came out just sounded like a robot. They didn't know where to put some of the like the inclinations in the voice and the up and down to make it sort of sound like it was natural. And then I remember, because I was actually writing the script, kind of going back into the scripts, and then as I learned how the AI worked, I then started adjusting the scripts so that I knew that the AI would then read that much more naturally. But it was still a much more manual process than obviously would be sold on the kind of like, you know, just throw your text in and then you've got like, you know, the whole voiceover. And you can hear it yourself on YouTube and you know,
Oh
some of
yeah,
the
totally,
other video
totally, and
platforms.
the
You know
caption
when it's there.
generation and things are all sort of out of whack. But no, I mean, I found this certainly sort of in my kind of writing job. You kind of think, well, I'm not going to be replaced by Bard or Chat GPT because it
Not
needs
yet.
me, not yet, no, because it needs me to ask it to write something. I then need to go through what it's written and improve it and enhance it. It's a good
Yeah. It
starting
does
point.
always sound, yeah, it
Yeah, it's
always
a
sounds like it
tool.
has been done by a machine
Yeah, I still
still.
find it's a tool that's very useful to me. It's not
Mm.
currently going to replace me. I think the other thing that's really interesting in the content creation world that often gets overlooked is using AI to analyze the sort of data of who's doing what and using that to spot maybe niches or trends and create so that you can, you know, it will then tell you there's a significant number of people are interested in, I don't know, a very specific form of Indian
Beard grooming.
or beard grooming or something really specific that you know it's sort of saying to you that, well, if you make some content that satisfies that, there's money to be made in that part of the long tail. And I think that's one of the really useful things of AI across all businesses is how it can find things in the data that humans don't see.
Okay, yeah, and see the patterns in the data.
Yeah,
Whereas, like, because if you remember the whole scandal around sort of Cambridge Analytica in
yeah,
terms of Brexit and the US election and all of that, and how they were basically, because in terms of Brexit, I heard they basically took the polling details in terms of who was registered to poll in any particular area, then like kind of got some data on what the general trends were in terms of if they were leaning left and leaning right, and were able to kind of put that together. And that was sort of like, you know, sort of the most advanced thing that had been done in terms of
yeah,
data, I think, using data, manipulating data for a kind of fixed result. And so, yes, I imagine if you sort of now put AI in again, it's just like the speed of it. So
yeah.
even us talking here, this video will be so out of date in
Yeah,
6 months.
yeah, absolutely,
You don't know what we're
absolutely.
talking about.
No, totally. But I think, you know, currently it sort of is on the money, and I think the sort of AI side of it is something we're going to see more and more of. But I think as a tool, it's a way of helping you sort of find the kind of
But do
content
you
to
think it
create.
always will be? You think it
No,
will always stay as a tool?
no, I
In
think
terms of the speed, if you think it only like literally we all
yeah,
started
I
using
don't
Chat
know.
GPT in November 2022, And then look where we
no,
are now. It's
no,
in
this is true.
everything already.
This is true. I don't know. I mean, like you say, I'd be a fool to predict it. I mean, I think it's like it's like sort of any kind of technology. It's like my computer. It's still a tool, even though the MacBook I'm using now is, you know, probably 100 times more sophisticated than the one I used 20 years ago. But it's still
Yeah, but you're
it's
still doing the thinking on that tool. With
I
AI,
am,
that's
but
not going to be the
I
case.
think with
We're going
the
to be doing
I
the
think the
thinking.
AI is only going to be as good as what you put in it. I think, but I don't know.
Well, and that's why, yeah, and without going off on a tangent, that's the worrying thing itself, because if what it's going on is
Well,
the input that we put in on the internet, they said this is like one of the biggest worries, right? It's
yeah, well,
learning
it'll
off
eat
the internet.
itself, won't it? It'll just be
That's
sort
not
of
good. Yeah.
yeah, it'll just be repeating its own trash back at itself. But yeah,
Yeah,
oh, yeah, but
exactly. Oh, yeah. Honestly, that
that's a whole other subject, I think.
exactly. So yes, we
Really,
won't go there.
but
But I think, like, interesting within the telemedia space, and sitting here quite humbly, I feel like, okay, if I try and preempt what I think AI is going to do in terms of content, there are certain things that we can experiment with, there are certain things that we can try out. But I think generally, because the growth is exponential, because it's training itself with everything that you teach it and every prompt that you give it, is the telemedia, I don't like, well, is the telemedia industry ready to absorb that? Because I feel it's going to be a major shift when it comes to content. And obviously, my job now really in the coming years is to really remain at the front end of
yeah,
whatever those developments are. Because I think at this stage of the game, if you kind of sit on your laurels and kind of like, well, I know my bit and I've been doing it for 23 years and all of this, that, and the other, you'll be left behind in like 5 minutes. So I think, as an industry, and especially when you go to the conference, when you go to the telemedia conference, and you sort of like, you see the familiar faces, there are people who are like sort of very new, innovative, young, just coming into the market with new ideas. There are people that have been there, that we've been meeting there for sort of like over 20 years, some think so maybe 30 years at some in instances. And so, what we have is, and that's, I think, one of the wonderful things that telemedia brings is this kind of brainstorm between us in terms of, okay, well, I provide the services, I provide the content. What do you need? How can I do it?
yeah,
And that dialogue and those conferences, that's why they're so important, because you come away from that understanding the commercial requirements, and then how can I create content in the most efficient way, the most cost effective way to meet the requirements of my clients, the service providers and the marketeers in 2024.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think, ladies and gentlemen watching, Telemedia 8.1 Live is taking place on the 26th of February in Barcelona around Mobile World Congress. And as Julia says, it is the place to talk to people about this. I have always found in the 30 years, man and boy, that I've done telemedia, that they are quite an open-minded bunch, really, like whether they're
Yeah.
like in it for the long haul or, like you say, sort of, the young thrusting people that are joining it all the time. There is that willingness
Which is
to
also fantastic, because they
embrace.
come with a new mindset. It's like
Yeah,
even,
but
sort of having
yeah,
Charlotte, like, sort of a
yeah,
25-year-old come into my business this year. It's been an absolute game changer, because like sort of like looking at the business from
mm,
her eyes rather than my eyes, having
yeah,
been in it for
absolutely,
23 years,
absolutely, and
is,
that's
yeah.
hopefully what we'll get. And so yeah, so I expect a lot of chat about AI, but more kind of like, yes, how you can use it rather than what it potentially can
Yes,
deliver.
and I think there's definitely going to be an age for that. I think, but I do think we need to be respectful that it's self-learning, and
Yeah,
so that's the bit where I think it
totally.
makes it exponential.
Totally. Excellent. Well, Julia, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I look forward to catching up with you in person in Barcelona. I
Only a
assume
week away.
it
See you there. If anybody
is
wants to
that
talk about content, we will be there.
absolutely. Oh, you must. Yes, you must. Anyone who's there must go and find Julia and Seriously Fresh Media, because they are the place to go for content. And I look forward to seeing all of you out there as well. So, Julia, thanks again for joining us. Thanks for sharing that really interesting discussion. We must do it again. And safe travels, and I'll see you in Barcelona. And everyone else watching, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks' time, possibly live from Barcelona, and where we can talk about some more stuff to do with content, VAS, carrier billing, and all the good stuff. Anyway, thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Thanks, Paul.